Hello there, my name is Adam Forbes. I'm the host of the Corporate Escapology podcast and the author of Corporate Escapology, the book. Today, my guest is Duncan Blake. Duncan spent more than 30 years working for BP. He really was a specialist in brand and was part of the team that saw the development, the design and execution of the Helios brand over the last 20 years. But when it came time for him to leave, he was a bit of a crossroads. Did he go and do some consultancy? Did he work for an agency? Did he go and find another company that needed the kind of skills that he developed at BP? No, he decided he was going to instead follow a passion for cookery. And so he is currently retraining as a chef. But what you'll hear from the podcast is there are a lot of common similarities and parallels between the work he's doing as a chef and the work he was doing at BP. Demonstrating yet again how we use our corporate training, our skills, experience and know-how that we learned during our corporate careers to best effect afterwards too. So let's meet Duncan now. Hello, Duncan. Thanks very much for joining me today on the Corporate Escapology podcast. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here too. So this is your 11th podcast, you tell me, but it's my first. So,
I'm very glad. Yeah, I'm very glad to have you here on my 11th podcast. So let's start. So I've known you quite a few years now, and you've had an interesting career, most of which I've known with you at BP, but you started out at Mobil. So you're an oil man through and through, are you?
Well, that's right. So I started at Mobil back in 1989, but I'd actually been a sandwich student there for a year in 1987. So I sort of go way back in the oil industry.
Okay. What made you even pick it as for your sandwich year?
Well, I was doing a business studies degree and I was looking for a year in industry and I sent off lots of applications to different companies and Mobil was one of them. Mobil had a history of taking sandwich students. I think they sort of took about 20, 25 sandwich students into their business. And they were advertising for a role in their marketing department, in their sort of marketing development team. So I fired off an application. It also helped that I think they paid more than any of the other companies that were places to sell. Yeah. So that was quite nice.
And so how long did you stay at Mobil?
Well, I was at Mobil for, I think it was 7 years. So the first 7 years of after graduation. And in a sense, you might wonder why I made the transition to BP, but it was really down to a joint venture between BP and Mobil in Europe. And the fuels business sort of transitioned across to BP. So up until that time, I'd been working in sort of general management and retail management. I'd worked my way up to be a district manager at Mobil. And then with the joint venture, we all had to sort of reapply for our jobs. And there was an opportunity to move into marketing. So that's something I grabbed because I'd always seen my career progressing in the marketing direction. But I was pleased that I sort of spent that first 6 or 7 years kind of getting a good grounding in business, understanding business, developing my leadership skills before moving into marketing.
And what kind of marketing was it that you started to do when you were in BP then? Where did you sort of start off?
Yeah, well, initially I worked in the brand communications team within the sort of the newly formed BP Mobil joint venture. So initially I was responsible for the campaign to communicate to customers why these two brands are coming together, why the Mobil sites are rebranding as BP, whether they'd still be able to get their Premier points, their loyalty points, which were very popular at the time at Mobil, and we transitioned that across to BP. So it was all about the best of both worlds and bringing the best of Mobil and BP together. I spent probably 2 years working on the integration and the marketing of the much bigger now BP network, because it sort of jettisoned us from I think number 2 in the UK to number 1.
Great. And, but then it all sort of changed, didn't it? And this is really how you became, people always talk about becoming famous for particular jobs, but you really became famous when the whole brand for BP shifted from the shield and went to the brand it is today. It's one of those sort of moments, well, at least within the company, was fairly symbolic as well as fairly strategic. What was that like, there being part of that team that was coming up with this almost new identity and face of BP at the time?
Well, it was an amazing opportunity. Somebody spoke to me and said, was I interested in going to work in London, because I was based in Milton Keynes at the time, in Botanic House. BP had just merged with Amico, so the initial sort of task was really about integrating BP and Amico, and I got to work on the integration identity for that joint venture. But I think all the time behind the scenes, we were working on the new branding for the company post the integration identity. And I think that was in many ways a sort of once in a career opportunity. I was really enjoying what I was doing in Milton Keynes, but here was an opportunity to sort of go to London, to work in head office, to work for a company that had just been through a whole series of mergers and acquisitions. I think the Amico merger was the biggest corporate merger in history, and to rebrand that organization. It's not often you get a chance to rebrand an iconic brand like BP. So it was just a great opportunity, and it was right up my street, and it sort of played to, what I was saying earlier about having a sort of creative bent. I wanted to work in that sort of world of corporate identity and positioning.
But it must have been, for all that lovely creative part, that must have been an awful lot of politics, an awful lot of stakeholder management, an awful lot of vested interests in the old brand and where it needed to go next. How did you sort of navigate all of that, and what kind of skills do you think you were developing through that experience?
Well, I think I learned a lot from those around me, because when I went in, I was, still relatively junior, still relatively early in my career. And so there was a lot of learning from those around me, because this wasn't a rebranded BP. This was the forming of a new identity for this new company. Yeah, half of the people, or I think more than half the people in the company at that time had come from a different company, whether that was Amico or whether it's somebody like me who come from Mobile. But there were a series of other companies that we acquired over the sort of preceding 18 months. So it was very much forming of a new identity, forming of a new company. I went off and did other things for a while after the launch of the brand, briefly for a couple of years. Okay. And then I came back to sort of pick up where I'd left off. I think that the launching of the brand was a major step, but it was probably the first step. We then had to actually build that brand, build the consistency, and build the look and feel, and put all of the sort of the systems in place to operationalize it around the world. So there's a huge amount of work left to do. And when I had the opportunity to come back and pick that up, then that's something that I jumped at. So I was very lucky and privileged to work in that small team. And then it was, I think, fortunate that I got the opportunity to come back and have a second go in that team. And then over time, because I'd been there at the launch, it's something that started to become sort of synonymous with me. So the longer I stayed there, it became more and more synonymous with me and representative of my career.
And so, thinking of that then, did you not think, I'll go and do this with another company then, and have that experience again? What was the sort of decision making in your head around staying and building it versus doing what you've done again for another big company and having that experience again?
Well, I could have gone and worked somewhere else for sure. I mean, there would have been times in my career where I had the opportunity to go elsewhere. but I had absolutely no reason to leave BP. I love BP. It's a great company. And I felt that I could continue to add value at BP. But also I was sort of anchored in BP. Sort of part of why I was successful at BP was because of the history that I'd had at BP. And I just didn't feel that was something that I wanted to leave behind.
And how did you feel being a leader of specialists? How was that different from being somebody that was quite hands-on before, as you started to get more and more senior inside the company?
Yeah, well, so I think there were really 4 phases in my career. So there was the early phase that we talked about, where I sort of built some business knowledge and expertise and some leadership skills. And then I moved into the marketing space, and it was really about sort of building expertise in that area for the second phase. And then I think in the third phase, I'd sort of built that expertise and I was operating as a specialist. And then finally, I made the transition from, being a specialist, working largely on my own or with a small team, to being a manager of specialists. And I think making the transition from that third phase to the fourth phase was probably the hardest bit, because there's always that paradox where when you're a specialist and you're delivering on a daily basis, you've got things to deliver yourself, and you're also trying to manage because you've got people working for you. It's quite hard to sort of balance those two things. But I would say maybe, 6 or 7 years ago, I was able to make that sort of transition fully into managing a specialist. So I was less doing on a daily basis and really managing the team and being more strategic about managing the team. So I think often people find that the hardest sort of step to make. And in a way, I think I had to shape that myself, because in order to get into that position where you're managing specialists and doing less of the doing on a daily basis, certainly I found I had to sort of broaden my remit, such that I could be in that sort of position where I had the right team of people in place that I could lead.
The other thing I noticed talking to people like you, or particularly when I was talking to for researching for the book, was when you get to that point and there is only one head of brand, the opportunities to do other things decrease. Just the number of them that you could do, because also particularly somebody like you had this very strong association with that one thing, that your ability to flip into a sales role or even another general marketing role was probably quite restricted by that time because you had specialized so much. Did you feel at any time that was making you vulnerable? I know you said they would always need one, but it wouldn't necessarily be, could be somebody else, couldn't it? Somebody could be flipped in from another company, or somebody comes from the side. So how did that feel, that being that specialist all the way through and really strongly associated with that thing?
Well, I'm not sure I felt particularly vulnerable. But I accept that it does create a certain vulnerability. And also it sort of cuts down your options. So I don't know, if I was sort of leading a business somewhere, there's lots of businesses in large companies like BP, so you can move from business to business. If you're working in, the sort of the financial area of a large company, there's sort of lots of, finance roles in businesses, across the company. So you've got more options. And you can probably transfer from a sort of finance role into a general manager role. Whereas I think the opportunities, if you're a sort of brand expert or marketing expert, the opportunities to move into a different part of a company are probably less. So I think there's lots of opportunities early on in your career because there's lots of different marketing roles. But the further you get up, I think there's inevitably less opportunity. So for me, towards the end of my career, there's probably only 2 or 3 roles that I would have sort of been appropriate for or would have been considered for within the company.
Yeah, okay, so
that was fine. I was comfortable with that.
You were comfortable with that.
I guess I made the decision that I would have a more fulfilling, better career by specializing and staying in that area and shaping my own career and building on what I'd done previously at BP.
Yeah, interesting. And so it did come to an end. So how many years was it in total? Was it 13 years that you stayed?
Too many to mention. It was a little more than 30 years, yes.
Yeah. Which is phenomenal, isn't it, for one company? I mean, I know it's multiple companies really, but really, to all intents and purposes, one company. So when the time came to leave, tell us about that experience of leaving. And it was part of the same restructure as me, but I think it took many years more for them to kind of let you go than it did me, where they seemed to be happier to let me go.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was part of a restructure. I think, it was difficult because I'd been there for so many years. So when you make the decision that you're going to move on and do something else, that it's a little bit daunting. You become a little bit institutionalized. Having worked for a company for 30 years, you wonder, well, what is it that I can do? What are my transferable skills? What sort of job am I going to do? That you just find that a little daunting. And I suppose, I thought long and hard about what it was I was going to do. I talked to lots of different people. And eventually I think I thought, well, this is an opportunity to do something, completely different. Initially I thought, well, maybe I'll do some brand consultancy. Obviously I considered roles in other companies. But I sort of stepped back and thought, no, this is a gift. I've had a fantastic career in a great company, and I can do something else. I've sort of got to the point where I'm able to do that. And it would have been easy to sort of slip back into the comfort zone and do something in the sort of the brand and marketing space or a consultancy role. But I had to keep forcing myself to sort of move forward and look for something a little different.
And tell the audience, Mr. Duncan Blake, what did you change into?
Well, eventually, after considering my options, I decided to become a chef. I haven't. So why a chef? I hear you say. Well, it's certainly creative. It's certainly very different from what I've done in the past. But also, I love cooking. So I've been a keen amateur cook for many years, and it's something that I wanted to sort of pursue professionally. And I just felt that it was time to do something different, to sort of break with the past and to see what else I've got in me. I sort of quite like the idea of redefining myself. So, when people ask you, when you go out, you're at a dinner party or whatever, or a party, and people ask you what you do, I've been saying a similar thing for many, many years, for decades. And I'd like to be able to sort of say something else. So I'd like to say, well, I'm a chef. So this, people talk about a sort of second chapter. So this is very much the second chapter for me.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. And I was really also very interested how you've gone and trained as a chef, because one of the things that I wrote about in my book is the sort of imposter syndrome that many of us feel when you sort of hinted at it a bit earlier, when you leave, what could I do? How transferable are my skills? And it's tempting often to educate ourselves because we feel that's going to make ourselves feel better, when in actual fact, we probably can do these things, or at least good enough. And the customer is the best one to prove whether it's good enough, rather than a qualification usually anyway. But you decided very deliberately or intentionally to go and retrain. So tell us about that process rather than just starting up and doing it. Why did you want to go down that route?
Well, as I said, I've been a keen amateur chef for many years, but I sort of recognize that doesn't necessarily translate into professional cooking. And so I sort of realized I had to go out and get the training. I needed the rigor. I needed to learn how to do things properly. And actually, I did sort of wonder because, when I looked at the curriculum, there were lots of things on there that I thought that I could do. But at the same time, there were lots of things that I knew I couldn't do. And then when I actually got to school, I realized that some of the things that I thought I could do, I couldn't do very well. And actually what I found is that I learn several things every day. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to do because I go into that school and I learn something new every day.
Right.
And, I just find that incredibly exciting. Yeah.
So
exciting.
what it's full time this course. So tell us a bit more about what are you doing like on a day-to-day basis? I'm just fascinated versus what it must have been like to be sitting in head office, and now you're sitting in a kitchen learning totally different things.
Well, it is very, very different, but don't forget, I'm paying for the privilege to do this as opposed to being paid. So it is very different. But the intention is to work as a chef professionally at the end of the course. I'm at Leith School of Food and Wine, which is in West London, near Chiswick. It's a 1-year diploma. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of the best sort of qualifications out there. Leith is a fantastic cookery school, incredibly professional. The staff are brilliant. It's a very friendly environment. Leith is very well connected. They have something called Leith's List, which is sort of like an employment agency for people in the food industry. So I just think it's an opportunity to sort of learn from the best and really prepare myself well for making that transition into the world of food.
So one of the things that keeps coming back to me is the continuity across these two very different careers is this word precision. And so is that something that, you're conscious of, that there's a precision in everything you're doing, and that you need to be part of your working life, maybe even your home life as well?
Well, I hadn't really thought of it that way. It hadn't occurred to me while I was at school. But I guess there was a lot of precision involved with sort of managing the brand and doing what I did in terms of sort of advertising and marketing and that type of thing. So I guess in some way that sort of prepared me for what I'm doing now at the cookery school. But there is a big focus on precision, more so than I'd imagined. So often I will do things that I've always done and be told that they're just not precise enough. So for example, things like the amount of salt that you put into a recipe if you're making bread, it has to be very, very precise. Otherwise the recipe just doesn't work properly. So there's a lot of precision, big focus on that. And also refinement. So I think refinement is sort of one of the key things that the school is looking for in this intermediate term. So it's lifting up the standard of everything that you do. And if you do everything precisely and think about how to refine every step of what you're doing, then you will end up with something that's very refined. But you have to do it in a sort of quite systematic way, and you have to be sort of very focused on that refinement through the whole process. If bits of it just aren't great on the way, you're never going to end up with a finished product that's refined. So I think there is a sort of an art to that, but there's also the science of how you do things. And certain recipes call for more science than art, and some more art than science. In fact, I sort of think back to my days working on the brand and the training that we used to do. We used to do this thing called the Brand Communications Excellence training course. And we used to talk about sort of branding and marketing being a combination of art and science. And I think many things are like that. It's just very obvious and very visible, I think, when you're cooking.
Yeah. So I was very interested in what you said as well just a few minutes ago about the Leith's List and the sense of, where you could go afterwards. And it de-risks things a bit. for you. So tell us a bit about what you're planning next, and how does that leads list element, how does that factor into some of your plannings?
Yeah. Well, I think most people who I've talked to who are on the course, and I mean, there's a lot of people. I think it's over 80 people doing the diploma that I'm on, of all ages. I mean, it so happens that I'm the oldest on the course, but there are people of all ages, and I'm in the sort of the career-changing group, which tends to be people who are slightly older. But talking to them, most people don't know exactly what it is that they're going to do at the end of the year. And I think the school kind of encourages people to come in with an open mind. And inevitably, you opportunities occur, through things like lease list. You start to sort of understand what it is that you enjoy doing or what you're good at. People around you have ideas, things that they'd like to do. So people often sort of end up teaming up with each other to sort of launch businesses or to sort of go in and do things together. So I think it's a real sort of melting pot of ideas. And I think over the course of the year, you start to get a feel for what it is that you might like to do. One of the things that we are encouraged to do, in fact, I think it's mandatory, is to do work experience during the year. So during the Christmas holidays, for example, I went to work in a Michelin-starred restaurant called the Dysart, and did what's called a stage, which is basically work experience in the food industry, and that was just a brilliant experience. And I said that I'm doing my exams at the moment, and then I'm into the Easter holidays. And during the holidays, I'm going to be doing a couple of things. I'm going to go and work in a restaurant and hotel in the Highlands of Scotland, in a place called Pitlochry.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a place called Ballintaggart up there, which has started by a Leith graduate a number of years ago. So I've got an opportunity to go and get some work experience up there. So I'm going to be working for a week up in the Highlands. And then after Easter, I'm going to be doing some work at the River Cafe in Hammersmith. So, very well known, iconic restaurant. I've got all the River Cafe cookbooks, so it's going to be fantastic to go and see, behind the scenes there. So I think as you do this sort of work experience, you start to get a feel for what type of cookery you really enjoy, what type of restaurant you might want to work in. A lot of people work as private chefs. Quite a lot of people that graduate from the program end up in doing private chefing in one shape or the other, or doing catering for events. In fact, I set up an Instagram feed where I put all of the some of the photos of the food that I cook at school, and I've already had somebody contact me to say, would I go and cook for them in June for 10 people. So
amazing, isn't it?
Can I do that? Am I qualified to do that? What am I,
Michelin star chef.
But the school helps you with that type of thing as well. So, we work on things like menu planning. And we have to develop a portfolio of recipes and that type of thing that we can show to clients. We do costing exercises. So they really do teach you the sort of ins and outs of the catering industry.
That's great. And I think the Instagram thing is a really good example too of this de-risking that's going on. So before you've even finished, you're effectively building a wait list of people that might want to consume your services, literally consume your services afterwards when you're ready, which I think is amazing. Rather than traditionally going at the qualification, then start going to market, you're almost going to market before you've finished and before you're ready, which creates a little bit of anticipation and for you just reduces that risk of the tumbleweed moment when you go to market and no one wants what you're offering. So that's a classic sort of startup approach to building a business, which I think is fascinating. And Yeah, great for you putting yourself out there, because I mean it's pretty vulnerable. They do look pretty good.
Yeah.
So probably you're probably filtering out the ones that look a bit ropey. Probably Thursdays. This won't go on to your Instagram feed, I'm thinking. But
I've done 30 years in marketing, Adam.
Well, that's right. But even so, I think there is some vulnerability showing your work off like that, and to be commended, I think. And the same about starting at the bottom again, going into an organization where you're at the very, very bottom in the kitchen, and proving yourself over time, and showing that you can, you can improve and you can listen and learn. I think a lot of people might be surprised somebody with your experience would go and do something like that. I think it is highly unusual because most people wouldn't put themselves in that situation. So, right.
But I think you've got to approach it with a degree of humility. And I am starting at the bottom. I was thinking about networking actually, and because it's a really important part of building a career. I think building a network of people around you, and so I'm sort of starting afresh with developing a completely different network. But I think even the work experience that I did at Christmas, I've started to build sort of contacts there. People I've worked with, people that I could turn to for advice, people that might be able to recommend me if I was looking to get a job somewhere else. So I am in that sort of phase of building a new sort of network of contacts, but also the people at the school. And, there's a lot of sort of 18, 19-year-olds there. And actually they're as likely to find me a job as anybody else, because they're going in and doing work experience for the first time in restaurants, and could easily sort of recommend me to somebody they were working for. So I think that's something I learned in my sort of in the first part of my career, the importance of a network, but now I'm sort of just doing that. So it's sort of second nature to me to start to build that.
That's interesting.
Network.
That's interesting.
But possibly I can draw on my old network as well. So if I worked, for instance, to go out as a private chef or to cater for events and that type of thing, I'd be able to possibly reach back into my network people, because they potential employers for a private chef or for somebody to do catered events.
Yeah, I'm sure people would be intrigued to have Duncan come round and serve them dinner. I think a lot of people might pay for that actually. So maybe start off there. But that's an interesting point to end on, which is where I was planning to, which is like, what are you taking from your corporate career into this new field? So, I mean, that's a really great example of that networking that you learned to do within a big company, and you're taking the same approach now. Whereas somebody who may not have that experience might have just started thinking about that towards the end of the course. You've been sort of thinking about it throughout. So it's sort of been core. It's almost unconscious to you because it's just so naturally been developed. What other kinds of things like that do you see that you're taking from one? So it's not a complete new Duncan. This is actually Duncan, but just put into a different context and thriving.
Yeah, well, I would say resilience is important. So I've learned the importance of resilience over my career. I've become more resilient. And I think, especially in a kitchen environment, you need to demonstrate resilience. So that's something I can read across. Teamwork. I mentioned working in a Michelin-starred restaurant. There's a team of people there, and they all need to be working together to produce the right result. So I think teamwork's another thing I would sort of read across. People skills, just how to relate to people. Having that confidence to sort of go up to people and talk to them, and ask them about themselves and how they're getting on, and just start to build relationships. I think somebody coming in with experience is able to do that in a way that people just sort of starting out on the career are not going to be able to do. So I don't know yet. We'll see. But I just think that there are lots of things that I've done over the years that I can draw from, and, get insight from, in this new world.
Yeah, it's super exciting. Brilliant. Well, I mean, I hate to use the word I'm really impressed, Duncan, but honestly, I just think so many people would not do what you're doing. And I hope this podcast inspires people to, I mean, there's a bit of following a dream, isn't there? I mean, there's something you love doing, a passion, and you decided to turn it into a career at a time when it would have been so easy, inevitable almost, to go and work for an agency, go and work for another big company, be a consultant, do what you know. I mean, these things are all perfectly laudable, of course, but to see this as a big opportunity, as you said, and then to go after it wholeheartedly, not just on a part-time basis, oh, I'll just try it, but actually throw yourself in a whole year learning new skills, reinventing yourself, but then bringing all this experience with you. I mean, I hope it really inspires people that they can do this, and they should do this if they have that passion and that urge to really live that very different second life. Super exciting. I wish you lots of luck.
No, well, thank you, and it was, it was something that I had doubts over, consistently, a lot initially, and then less so as sort of time went by. But I found myself constantly being sort of dragged back to, oh, well, I can just go and do some consultancy, or, maybe I should get a job. Why am I doing this? This is just sort of crazy. But I had to sort of keep going back to basics and reminding myself of why I wanted to do it. And, and that hasn't stopped now. Occasionally I think, well, do I really want to go and work and do sort of 13, 14-hour shifts in a restaurant and not earn that much money? And I have to remind myself why I'm doing this, and stop myself from sort of retreating back to what I know and the sort of the safety of the corporate world, or the world of branding or consultancy or whatever it might be. And so if anybody's setting out on this type of career change, they will inevitably have self-doubt. And you just sort of, you have to be sure of what you want to do, but then really sort of push yourself towards that, because inevitably some things will start to sort of draw you back to what you feel more comfortable with.
Great. Well, let's end it there. Brilliant. Thanks, Duncan. Thanks a lot.
Take care.